So I should be live now. I'm just checking as usual, just to make sure everything works as I think. So let's see. Can I hear myself checking on another screen? Hello? Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm not sure. Hello? Yeah, okay, perfect. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. My name is Florent, I work at Neo4j. And today I'll start a new series of streams on Spring Data Neo4j 6, which is a new major version that has been released mid-November. So first, let me make sure that I can see the chat and try to answer some questions already maybe. So there is one question which I'm not sure to completely understand, but let's see. Is this live? Yes, it is live. It is live indeed. So yes, so you're welcome to stay. And the idea here is I will have a series of live streams starting today, live coding and application with Spring Data Neo4j 6. That's the idea. I'm not sure how many sessions that will take, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see together and we'll learn together. And yeah, hopefully that will be a useful content that you can reuse when you're trying to create a new application yourself, or even migrate one. And that might be one topic I might cover later if you're all interested, because as I will explain shortly, Spring Data Neo4j 5 was the previous major version, but it's quite different from the new version. So migration might not be straightforward in every scenario, so it could be useful to cover that at some point. So let me try maybe to do this instead. And so one question, is this going to be Java? So that's a good question. So Spring Data Neo4j is a project running on the JVM. So it could be Java, it could be Kotlin. I'm gonna keep it in Java for now. I mean, I'm basically saying Java or Kotlin. It could be, so some other languages as well, as long as it runs on the JVM. But there is a very good support from the Spring projects for Java, of course, and Kotlin. So Kotlin could be an option indeed. And so yeah, I'm gonna stick with Java for now. Again, we might do an extra session at some point focusing on Kotlin on a small example with Spring Data Neo4j and Kotlin, because that works as well, of course. It's as well supported as in any other Spring project, so for sure, that's definitely an option. And yeah, so thank you for joining. And yeah, so let me start to share my screen. I will basically start from scratch, and by from scratch, I mean not diving right away into code, but first, let me tell you what my idea is here, my idea about the project I want to work on. So one thing I do at Neo4j since I joined last October is working closely with the drivers team. So the drivers team, as you might know, is responsible for all the beautiful drivers you can find. If you type Neo4j drivers, you will find there is a Python, there are many other languages. So some officially supported, some others not. So you have the develop language guides and you have the driver's manual. So the driver's manual basically details all the official drivers that we have. So Java, Python, Golang, JavaScript, and .NET. So we have 5 officially supported languages. And the Spring Data Neo4j team is also working closely with them. But as you might not know, actually, out of these 5 options, we also have community drivers. And drivers is a loose term here. So basically, it's a piece of software that allows you to connect your application to a Neo4j instance. That's the goal of a driver. So technically, it could mean several things. It could mean using the HTTP APIs. So they are the ones that have been stable for quite many years already. So that's qualifies as a driver, basically uses the transactional cipher endpoint, so you can send your queries and get a result. And there is the Bolt protocol, which is the one that 5 official drivers use, and some other drivers in the community use as well. And there is also the new HTTP API based on what we call the JOLT format, which is inspired from the Bolt protocol, but exposes all the information, all the typing information about your results in JSON in some kind of specialized version of specialized format based on JSON. So that's what drivers are. And my job at Neo4j is to make sure, I talk with the community of driver authors. I communicate changes, important changes that are relevant to them, but also try to understand the challenges, try to help them as much as I can. And as part of that, I've started, so chatting with driver authors and trying to identify their projects, the version of Bolt they're currently supporting, if they are a Bolt driver. Of course, doesn't apply for HTTP, etc., etc. So I have a big spreadsheet right now, which is very low tech, I must admit. But for instance, and I started, and I was thinking, come on, I work at Neo4j. Using a spreadsheet is a bit lame. I should have a graph for that. And my idea here for today and for the few next sessions would be to have some kind of simple application. So I was thinking of using Spring Data for that, to basically allow me to add any new driver project I find and add it to that that graph. So here is the manually imported data I have so far. So I'm using Neo4j desktop, and you can see, so that's something I've done manually. And the idea will be to recreate that from scratch. So we'll see how, because I don't have the whole plan, figured out. We will discover it together. But as you can see, I have, so the reddish nodes are drivers. So you have the GitHub URL. I mean, it could be GitLab or anything, but just a Git repository. Whether it's official or not, I mean, which would be quite easy because we only have 5 official drivers as of today. Then the language it's written in, whether it supports HTTP or Bolt or both, because some projects, even in the community, support both options. And ideally, what version? I mean, if they are Bolt driver, what version of Bolt? So that's something that evolves along with Neo4j versions. So for instance, if you're using Neo4j 4.2, which is the latest major version, major and minor version of Neo4j, the Bolt version used to communicate with it will be slightly different than, say, when you use Neo4j 3.5. So that's something also that's quite interesting, because depending on one version or the other, there are a few changes to implement that are not always completely straightforward. So that's also interesting. And then as an option, I also wrote some documentation, like if there is an official example, for instance, and if a documentation project, example project, or documentation somewhere, I would like to link it to the application. And what else? Am I missing anything? And I identified also some libraries. So sometimes people also not necessarily write a driver, but write an integration on top of a driver. So one example that comes to mind, for instance, is in the PHP world. You have Symfony, you have Laravel, and you have many other frameworks that come with their own system for usually object relational mapping. And so some people built integrations, so that you can flawlessly work with Symfony and manage your persistence with Neo4j or Laravel, etc., etc. And so that's also interesting for me to track. So basically, I'm interested in all what the community does for drivers, integrations, or maybe even library. Some people, for instance, just wrote a library to manage the Bolt bits, and you just have to import the library and use it as you wish. So the library itself is not a driver. It's not an application ready to use. It just implements all the necessary bits to interact with the Bolt server, for instance. So that's also interesting. That's also what I call library. So that's my messy graph here. And the idea is to have an application that allows me, instead of doing that manually, to do this with some kind of graphical user interface. So there might be some JavaScript or TypeScript involved at some point, but first I'm gonna start with the backend, which will be in Java and Spring Data Neo4j. And I'm gonna start, I don't promise I will be able to have this level of details at the end of the live streams, but at least some bits of that graph with the basic, at the very least, this, these reddish nodes, which are Git repositories, and whether they are official or not. So maybe let's start with this objective here, which is at least I'm able, at the end of the user story, so to say, I have a form. I can give the URI to the Git repository and say whether it's official or not. That would be already a good start. So for that, I need the backend, of course, to expose the REST API for the front end and make sure that when the REST API is called, the data ends up in a graph. So that's my objective. I mean, I probably won't be able to do all of that today, but that's the first user story I have in mind. So basically, I want to be, so I'm not gonna write as a user, I'm just gonna keep it simple. I want to be able to store driver repositories when filling the form with Git URI official. Yeah, I'm gonna make up a word, whether it's official or not, and maybe the transport and transport bold or HTTP. Maybe those three. And then I realized I shouldn't have picked big text box because it's too big. So I'm not gonna go through all the acceptance criteria, but of course, when you work with a real user stories, that's something you want because you want to have some objective criteria to make sure the user story is done. But that's basically what I envision here for now, is have some kind of form in my front-end application that allows me to give the Git URI, whether it's an official driver or not, and whether it supports bold, HTTP, or both. All right, so that's the idea of what I want to do, at least for now. It's, again, I won't be able to have the full graph just yet, but hopefully that makes sense. And if you have any questions, please tell me. And so, yeah, there is a question about data visualization. There are several libraries, and I know my colleague Adam also has worked on visualization quite a bit, but I don't have the answer right now. So there is D3.js, that's for sure an option. Also, there is quite a learning curve if you're not familiar with it, if you want to visualize, a graph like this in your own application. But, I might work on that bit as well during the live stream, so maybe I will learn with you. Although, spoiler alert, I probably won't use React.js just because I'm not familiar enough with it to have a proper TDD flow. And I'm much more at ease and comfortable with Angular. So I might use Angular when I start the front-end bit. And so without much further ado, let's start. And when I say start, I really mean start. So I'm basically going to start with we always do when we want to start a new Spring project. Start.spring.io. So I'm going to use a Maven project. I'm going to use Java. So there was this question: will I use Java or not? If you're interested in having some Kotlin example at some point, I'm happy to have a dedicated session for that. I'm just going to stick with the latest released version. I'm not going to try milestones or snapshot versions. And let's see. I'm going to use something like this, come Neo4j. I'm going to call this driver landscape, and then Neo4j driver landscape or something like this. All right, I want a jar. Java 11 sounds just fine. So what do I want? I'm just going to type Neo4j because I want Spring Data Neo4j. And let's see, I would be interested also for my test to run my test against Neo4j Docker container. So I believe test containers is probably available. Yeah. So we'll see whether that pulls also the dedicated Neo4j test container module. If not, I will just have to add it by hand. And so, yeah, that's already. So of course you can use curl if you want instead of just clicking through the interface if you want. But I'm gonna just keep it simple. I have an archive. That's all good. All right. So let's go to the terminal now. So let me unzip this driver landscape here. All right, let's go there. And then we'll start right away. So just for first build, let's, yeah, clean is completely useless because it's, I just cloned it. And please ask your questions while I'm doing that. That's, so if you have a question, please ask away. I'm happy to answer them. All right, so here we have our first build. Now I'm just gonna start IntelliJ, and we probably won't leave the IDE until the top of the next hour. Oh, I see I already have some Spring Data Neo4j users here because I have a question on YouTube so about the removal of depth. And indeed, in Spring Data Neo4j 5, there was a way to control the save depth. So how deep you want to save your graph, and the load depth, how same thing but for loading basically. And that has been removed because it could cause quite a few headaches. For instance, especially when the two depths are not matching properly, then you could end up deleting data because you didn't save enough, etc., etc. And I found them, I hadn't used Spring Data Neo4j 5 until recently when I had to do an in-channel training with my colleagues Jennifer in the DevRel team, and with the help of Gerrit, one of the Spring Data Neo4j maintainers. And then when I read that section, it took me several times to actually understand. So yeah, it's been removed, and the reason it's been removed is because it's quite it's quite difficult to use properly, and you can see that as an optimization. And there is no alternative directly if you really want to control. There is no direct concept matching that in Spring Data Neo4j 6. If you want, you can always resort to lower level abstractions, such as a Neo4j template or Neo4j client, where you would control the depth directly. Or you might, or resort to a custom query. That really depends on the use case. It's hard to give a generic answer, but you can try with a custom query if you're really, especially when, so for the load depth, you can try to replace it with a custom query to load only what you want. For the save depth, I guess the best bet would be to use something like Neo4j client or Neo4j template, which are basically abstraction layers at a lower level than the repositories I will talk about just now. And so, yeah, sorry, I won't be able to give a detailed answer because that would require some time away from the carrot example I want to show, but that would be a great question for our discourse, which is community.neo4j.com. So if you don't know it, I really invite you to join there and ask your questions. And of course, we also have the neo4j-users.slack.com, which is also available for questions. So yeah, really invite you if you have detailed questions to ask them here. I won't be able to balance detailed questions and live stream at the same time. I'm sorry, but I'm happy to try to have a look at your question over there. So thank you, but please feel free to. Oh, and I just realized I cannot type. So let's try again. Sorry, I don't want to show a typing error for the whole stream. So let's see. Remove, rename. Driver landscape instead of landscape, my bad. So yeah, much better. So let's do it again. Workspace, driver landscape with a D, that's much better. And here we go. Okay, sorry, so now we can get started. And by default, so let me just check real quick what's generated for us. So we have, the common setup for Spring Boot, which is to use parent POM, so at least you inherit from the standard plugin configuration and dependencies. And yeah, of course, the name is wrong, but not in the description, so it's not that bad. So I've got Java 11 test containers, that looks good. I've got the Neo4j starter, the test starter. Oh, nice. That's a very nice touch. So if you selected Neo4j in start.spring.io and test containers, they have this little touch when they also include the Neo4j module of test containers. So that's perfect. That's just something I wanted to make sure of, and indeed that's the case. So very, very good. Cool. So nothing to worry about anymore. So let's see, what do I have here? Probably just have a main, yeah, a basic main that doesn't do much, so that just start the Spring Boot application. But, oh, and the package is wrong, of course, and the application. Let me fix all of that because that's just too embarrassing to keep it for so long. Refactor, rename, our first refactoring. Yay. So yes, I also want to rename the test. And I will rename the package. I believe I can do it like this. Yeah, rename package, nice. Driver, landscape, yes. Okay, cool. So let's start with the test, shall we? So I'm gonna imagine I have some, how could I call this? I'm not even sure driver is the right name because it's not always about drivers, as I said earlier. It could be an integration for a framework, like this Laravel persistence library, or it could be a bolt library, so libraries that abstract all the bolt bits, but which is not a usable application directly like a driver. So maybe that's gonna clash a little bit, but how could I call this? Because I was thinking of repository, because after all, it's just a Git repository, but I'm not sure about the best name for this, really. Let's call it, I don't know. How could I? Let's call it driver for now. We will stick with it until I found a better name. So I would have something about a repository, and I would have a test. So let's start with a test. I'm using JUnit 5 by default, I think. Yep, so JUnit Jupyter is the JUnit 5 stuff. All right, and let's start with the tests. JUnit 5, I have, so that will be only at the data layer of my application, so the parts that only interact with the database. There would be any part interacting with HTTP incoming requests. So usually what you can do is this. So if you use Spring Data JPA, you can say data JPA test. If you use Mongo, probably data Mongo test. And in our case, we are just interested in having the beans, so the classes that have been configured for injection, related to the data layer. And I will come, again, if that's not clear, please ask questions away. I'm happy to try to detail that a little bit. So one thing I want to make sure of is I want to be able, at this point, I'm only interested in persisting stuff. So save the driver. And actually with JUnit 5, you can give it a description, I think. I don't remember, but it's not very important. I'm just gonna keep it there. And so I'm gonna need two things. I'm gonna need the repository itself, which doesn't exist yet, but it's all about declaring your intention first and then make the reality of what you want to do happen afterwards. So auto-wired, if you are not super familiar with the Spring framework, is a way to say please. So in that case, I would have a driver repository, again, that does not exist yet. Basically, so there is what we call an application context that will hold all the classes that are prepared for injection. And in that case, I'm asking the Spring framework, because I have this special annotation on my test class, it will be managed by Spring as well. That's why you can see this leaf here, which is part of the Spring framework logo. So Spring will manage that, and we say, oh, you're asking me for a driver repository, I will happily give it to you. And of course, it works with JUnit. So it's aware of the JUnit lifecycle, the before, after test, etc., etc. And it will inject me the class I want right before the test runs, so I can use it afterwards. And what do I want to do? So that's the first thing I need. And I also need something independent of my repository to check, because I need to save, of course, but I need to check that it actually ends up in the database. And I don't want to use a repository because, you know, we could be beaten by the double bug problem. Let's say there is both a bug in save and read in the repository, and somehow it completely cancels the bad behavior, and my test passes, also it shouldn't. That's why I tend to try to use a different way. So I could use, I don't know, let's see. Maybe a Neo4j client, or let's start with the driver. We'll see if that's a good option or not, and if not, we'll switch to something else. So driver is it's a, you know, the most basic level, which is a raw driver provided by the Java driver itself. So the Java Bolt driver, the official driver I was mentioning at the beginning of the session, which allows me to connect to a Neo4j instance. And so I want to do something like repository, which doesn't exist yet, but we'll make it so afterwards. So I will have a driver. I believe I can have everything by constructor, and, you know, we can have immutable entities. So we'll try that. I've not tried before, so we'll see how it goes. Probably some. So I'm just gonna have this. I don't know. I'm just making up some names. PHP driver. Let's see. And then something like, is it official or not? And what was the transport? And maybe some kind of driver transport. Let's see, it's only for HTTP. I'm just making that up, and we'll see. And then I assume, so that's, now I'm switching to a much lower level abstraction, which is the raw Java driver. And so I need to open a session. Then with this session, I can have a read transaction. So I want to read from the database, which gives me access to a transaction in which I can actually read stuff. So in that case, I can just do, so I can do run, and I can run a Cypher query there. So I assume I should get something like a driver, or maybe let's keep it simple. I assume there will be a driver, and I will just return it and check whether there is only one and whether that corresponds to what I wrote earlier. So that gives me a result, and I can do something like single. So single will fail if there is 0 or more than 1. So that's exactly what I want in that case, because I assume my database is empty at first. And yeah, you know what? I can run the assertion directly there, actually. I don't need to go out of the Lambda. OK, assert that. Maybe I can have this. So that's my record. That's my driver record. So I assume the, let's call it URI, will be this. So the same as here. Or, you know, I could, oops, yeah, I really cannot type today. I'm just, so this should already import it from assert.j, which is an awesome assertion library. If you haven't tried, I really invite you to do it. Then official, so wait, string maybe. Then official as Boolean. So maybe let me do it like this, so we can all read it. As Boolean is false. And finally, what do I have? Transport. So transport, driver record, get transport. So for now, I'm just going to keep it as a string. Or I could, do something like this, like driver transport, which does not exist yet, I know, but because it would probably be an, yeah, actually, when I was thinking, it could be both of them. So, let's say it's an array. Let's say it's an array. So nope, not a string, because it's gonna get complicated. As byte array, as list, I guess, is probably what I want in that case. As list and set list of objects, or yeah. So I probably want to convert my value. So value is the abstraction in the driver library. So the driver to represent value, but I want a string. And of course, IntelliJ to the rescue, which will make my code look more clever than I could ever be. And so I have this list, and actually it's equal to, in that case, my list is equal to a singleton list of just, okay, let's be sloppy and do that. And it should import it from collections, which is a standard Java API. Okay, that looks more or less how I want. However, let me move that around because I don't need it here. But keep an eye on the chat. So I'm gonna be cheating a little bit. I'm just gonna take the setup for the test container stuff for the test, because that's something I've already done several times, but not enough that I memorize it. So let's see. Because of course here at this point I don't have any database yet running in my test, so the application would just crash, which is not really what I want to do. So in that case, let me see. So I'm gonna, because we're using the JUnit Jupyter, so JUnit 5 integration of test containers, we can have custom annotations, etc., etc. So I can have this, which is super nice. I'm just going to use 4.2, which is the latest at the moment. So 4.2 something, 4.2.3, I believe, has been released yesterday. So at least now I have my container. What else? And then there is this very handy annotation that allows me to configure dynamically the credentials to connect to the database. So because we're using Spring Data Neo4j, there is all of these auto configurations that can react to properties. So in that case, what I'm doing here is I'm dynamically added those properties that will be available for Spring Data Neo4j to pick them up and configure the connection to the database automatically. So that's very, very handy and makes writing integration tests so much easier. So double thanks to the Spring Data Neo4j team for that, and for this module as well, because I believe Michael Simons, who is one of the maintainers of this module of test containers, authored this. So that really makes the experience so much easier. So in that case, I have a static container that will start before all my tests run. I will make sure that the Spring application context sees those properties that will trigger all the auto configuration of the Spring Data Neo4j module. And so, yeah, I will get everything properly configured. And so the last bits I need, so I have, of course, every time an empty database. I mean, not every time, actually, because my container is only running once per class. So if I have several tests, it would basically become an issue. So what I can do is add, after each test, something like, yeah, I can probably do something very similar to what I've done with the driver here, but just to make sure the data is removed every time, so my test won't, you know, interfere with others. So in that case, it would be a write transaction. So that's nice because now we have two examples, a read transaction and a write transaction. And I just want to do, you know, basically empty the database, which is this since Neo4j 2.2 or 2.3, I don't remember, but it's been a while. You can do this detach delete, which will not only delete the node, but delete all the relationships with it. And yeah, it wants it would be nice if they allowed consumer, you know, something without a return value. And yeah, that's probably enough. And so basically what happens here is unless there is an exception, the transaction will commit. So yeah, so that's my, I like to call it cleanup. That's just a personal thing, but yeah. So now I have a running container with an empty database at the beginning. My test might insert some stuff in there, but every time after each test, I want to make sure I remove everything. So I remove every node, and if they have relationships, remove those relationships as well. So let me maximize this again. And so finally, I'm getting to this driver repository. So that's one of the central abstraction of Spring Data in general and Spring Data Neo4j as well, of course. So let's create it, and I will try to explain what it is at the same time. So yeah, let's create it here. I have a driver repository, which will be an interface. So that's interesting bit. I won't have to implement any plumbing bits to connect to Neo4j. That will be taken care of for me. The idea is I declare what I want to do by sticking to some conventions, or sometimes, more often than not, at least just specifying the Cypher query I want to run, and it will manage to generate the code to connect to the database and run what I want. So that's my repository here, but of course it's not enough. So for now, I'm going to do, there are two approaches. One is to extend the most specialized repository, which exposes all the operations. Or you can do the contrary, which is expose the bare minimum and pick it bit by bit. So in that case, I want this. So I'm going to try, usually I do, you know, I'm a bit sloppy and just use paging and sorting repository or Neo4j repository. So if you look, you have this. So I'm not going to do this today because I want to try something new, but you basically have this, and you need two parameters. So the kind of entity that this repository managed. So in our case, it would be this driver class that does not exist yet, and the type of ID. So what identifies this entity? So what type of? And if you look at this, you will see it extends a bunch of things. So query by example, which I won't show today and probably won't show in the live stream sessions unless you're interested. Paging and sorting, so a repository with, so you've got, you know, the save all, find all, you've got, and if you go up the hierarchy, you will see other find all, but, you know, with pagination basically, and sort, so you can sort and page your stuff. Then the CRUD, so create, read, update, delete operations, you know, the save all, find, exist, count, delete, etc. And then finally, at the top of the hierarchy, you will find this repository. So if you really want to be to control what you expose, one way to do that is just to extend this interface and not go through this one, for instance. Because if you do that, then you expose everything, every method declared in that interface and in the parent interfaces. So you would end up, let's say you want to have only read-only operations or write-only operations, then you would be kind of screwed because you would actually expose everything. So usually I'm quite okay with it. Today I want to try to be, you know, a bit more careful. So what kind of entity do I want to manage with this repository? It will be, oh yeah, driver is not a great name, is it? Well, okay, it's okay. They shouldn't be collocated anyway, so that probably, oh, except, yeah, maybe I'm gonna call it Neo4j Driver or something. And the identity will be just a a long or maybe a UUID. I will try. We'll see. I'm all for trying today. I'm all for experimenting. So I have my repository, so that's nice. And then if you remember, what I want is to save one. I don't want to do a batch. So what I can do is just basically pick this. And so my S is actually my Neo4j driver. Okay, so that should be enough to do what I want. So UID is indeed the UID I want. So let's go back to our tests. So, and then we have this driver's transport. Yeah, actually it was an enum. We'll see. Maybe I'm not gonna do that. Maybe yeah, I'm gonna do that afterwards. I'm a bit, you know, time flies. So let's keep it simple for now. I'm just gonna do a string, which is horrible. It's not type safe at all. But yeah, let's be sloppy, and we'll try to correct it afterwards. So we have some room for improvements. And so yeah, I said it would be Neo4j driver. So there is that will be a bit better. So I have the save operation, UID, and let's create my my entity. So that will be a node. So that's I tell Spring Data Neo4j. So and everything in Spring Data Neo4j revolves around around nodes. So let me see it because I've been standing for a while, and so everything revolves around nodes. So that's my main concept here. And then now that my class exists, I will let IntelliJ do the rest. So one is URI, one is the official, and one is the transport. And because okay, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna refactor this. For now, I'm gonna cheat and I say it's a string. Because for now, that's only what I'm dealing with. So I'm not gonna try to think about the future too much. And so yeah. And when I have a case where I have dual transport, then yeah, so I will have to do this ugly hack, but okay. Yeah, because it needs to return something. So yeah, I'm gonna keep it simple enough so I can get, hopefully before the end of the session, to a successful test. And so yes, create bind parameters. Okay. And let's reread the doc together about immutable entities, because I don't fully remember, and that's the joy of live streams, right? I'm not pretending I know everything. I don't. So let's look together, because that's something I really want to show and do properly. So let's look at the reference. Reference docs. Yeah, I'm good. Spring Data Neo4j reference, which is the latest, and immutable. That's what interesting to find. Focus on immutable entities. So how does it look like? So yeah, I need an ID. I need a node. So by default, label is derived from the class name. But in our case, if we look at our tests, we want driver only, right? Yes, it's driver. So I'm gonna override that and say, so if you look, okay, I'm getting lost in shortcuts here. Hey, what's going on? Come on. Nope, doesn't want. Okay, here we go. So labels of value. So primary label would actually be driver and not Neo4j driver. I could annotate those with property if I want, but they have the same name as the field. So for now, I'm going to keep it simple. I don't have relationships just yet. So yeah, I'm not going to add those. And as you can see, so those are indeed immutable because I just use it as a construction and cannot be modified afterwards. Then I have this ID, which I'm very interested in. Oh, interesting. bits here. So yeah, that looks good to me. So let's try with this UID even. Let's spice it up a little bit. So I have, if I go back to the documentation, I have this. And to keep it immutable, I have this wither that will return a new instance if needed. And so I still keep, a single constructor with the fields. And yeah, so let's try with, I'm feeling adventurous. I've not done it before. Let's try this, which is my ID, because I believe there is a strategy for that. ID, so either there, nope, or the other one, generated value. And then, come on, why is it auto-completing that way? Let's look. So you see there is this generator, which by default relies on the internal ID. So the internal ID generated whenever you create another relationship in the database. But I believe if we look at the implementations of this ID generator, that we have something called UUID generator or an UID string. So what's the difference? So let's look at string generator first. OK, it's interested in strings, I guess. And if I use the UID generator, it generates UID. OK, so I've already used up my quota of strings that should not be strings. So I'm going to just stick with UID generator here. And I'm going to use this. So I think it's a value attribute, right? Let's see. Yeah, so I don't need to specify it. So I just want to use this dot class, I believe. Yeah, nice. Why is it unhappy? Yeah, because it cannot be final, because it's injected after the fact. Not after the fact, but it uses WID. So again, I have a fishbowl memory. So what do? I have these withers, so to say. So these things that allows me to augment my entity with an ID, because by default, when I create it manually, it doesn't have an ID yet, but once it's persisted, just before it's persisted, the Spring Data Neo4j will manage to assign a UID, and then you can get the entity with the UID. So in my case, it's almost the same, except it's not a long and it's not a movie, but apart from that, it will be the same. So I have this Neo4j driver with ID that takes a UID. And I assume instead of always recreating a new instance, so that's the small optimizations they've did here, so, which I quite like. And of course, here it's a tautology unless I do this, or actually no, because the field is ID. And so if ID equals this, then maybe, yeah, let's flip. If the UID equals my ID already, then I just return this because I don't have any change to do. Otherwise, I just need to create a new instance, new Neo4j driver with this URI, or maybe I can be sloppy. I'm going to create a private constructor. That will be even easier. Driver, then driver.id. I can do that, and then return this driver. And here I can copy basically everything, taking an existing instance, except it will be private. And I wonder if there is some kind of shortcut. Create field, nope, too bad. So the same as before, except it's from the driver directly. So here it will be Neo4j driver.uri, Neo4j. So let me maybe do this. Neo4j driver. Okay. And why is it complaining? Does not copy field ID. Yeah, I know that's on purpose. All right, so and that should be picked up automatically by Spring Data Neo4j. And so the nice thing is I can construct everything at once. I don't have to use setters. I don't have to use mutability. And Spring Data Neo4j will make sure to pick up this wither, so to say, and add the ID if I want to. So that looks quite nice. So again, I've cheated a little bit on the transport, but we will revisit that in the next stream maybe to make sure it works. So I'm gonna get rid of this one because it's really annoying and I keep clicking on it. If something blows up, I will find out. I will have more tests later. So if I recap what we have so far, we have a container that's starting thanks to the Neo4j module of test containers, which make things a bit easier. I automatically configure it so with the right properties that Spring Data Neo4j can react to, so that way the connection is already there. Make sure that after every test, I delete the data. Then I inject repository and driver. I could actually do it only for the test method here, but I'm probably going to reuse it later, so that's why I'm doing that. Here I can create my Neo4j driver. So for lack of a better name, if you have better name suggestions, I'm all for it, because they are not necessarily directly drivers. It could be libraries, it could be integration from framework, but for now, I'm just going to name it like that way. And finally, once it's saved, I want to make sure it's actually saved, so I'm using another way. And hopefully that's a good way to do it. I'm just not sure about one particular aspect, but we'll see that. So if everything works well, the test should pass. Otherwise, I've missed something. And let's see. And if I miss something, that's okay. We're all learning, and myself included. Because that's even, I think that's the first time I write an immutable entity. So hopefully I didn't mess that up. So it's complaining. Of course, why would I succeed at the first attempt? Failed to load application context. Here you are creating bin with name Neo4j Driver. Interesting. Configuration properties, bind exception. Prefix Spring Neo4j. So let's see what's going on. Did I mess up somehow? Fail to bind property under Spring Neo4j URI to java.net. Oh, that's interesting. It's the first time I see it. Mapped port. Yes, there is something fishy going on with this. That's interesting, because I believe that would be enough. What did I miss? What did I miss here? Let me check real quick. Let me try to find an example of something I've already done. Why would that fail? That's interesting. And that's the joy of live streams for you, when things fail and you don't always know why. So, registry, container, driver. Yep. Why is it complaining? I'm not sure I completely understand here. Why is it complaining about this? So let's see why it's it's like it doesn't like the URI that I'm giving it. Somehow it cannot parse the value. So let's see what the container gives me. Why is it failing that way? So if I run this Neo4j container, get bolt. Oh, something is wrong. Really? Did I forget something obvious here? It should start already, or should it not? Or maybe. Oh, wait, I know why. Or maybe not. No, actually, no, that's probably mistaken, but just in case. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I was about to say there might be a port conflict here, but no, because test containers, the way it maps ports, so in our case, for instance, with the test container I'm using, it would bind the port of the container for Bolt, which is 76887, to a random port on my local machine, so it should not conflict with anything. That's interesting. Or maybe I have another ID, but we'll see. Yeah, so still the same issue. Yeah, still complaining about that. Interesting. Spring Neo4j URI, and I'm pretty sure I have the right configuration here. And you know, sometimes we have the annoying conflicts between test containers and Docker. Is it the last version? So I'm gonna check I have the last version of test containers. And if not, I'm just gonna hope that an upgrade would fix it. No, it's the last version, 1.15.1. So nope. Interesting. So that's a live failure for you. The demo goals are against me today. I will have to figure that out probably after the live. I mean, I have 5 minutes left, so one can hope I can figure it out, but maybe not. So what's going on? What's going on here? Why doesn't it start? That's interesting. That's very interesting. Let me check. Maybe I can find another example, maybe. So I don't need this at the moment. Neo4j container for the 2. Why would it complain? Oh, wait, of course. I think I know why. I know why. I forgot an annotation. I forgot an annotation for the test container bit. Let me confirm it's that. And if that's the case, that's why the container hasn't started, because I forgot an annotation that would tell test containers to manage that test class. That's probably why. So let me see real quick, but I'm pretty sure I forgot a tiny annotation, so easy to forget. But then, yes, of course, yes. That's why the container did not start, and when the container doesn't start, of course, I cannot, try to get some mapped port. So not only do I need this data Neo4j test that we instruct Spring to just make available the classes, the data-related classes for injection, so repositories and the likes, but not something like an HTTP controller, etc., etc. I mean, controller in general. So yeah, I forgot this little bit here. Silly me. So, and with this, I can instruct test container to say, hey, please look at every @container annotated field and start them whenever it makes sense. And because I forgot that, the container did not start, so I was trying to get the URI to connect to it, but knowing the URI means I need to know the mapped port, and I cannot get the local mapped port if the container has not started. So yes, just took me 5 minutes more than I would have hoped to realize, but hopefully now my container should start, and yeah, it's starting. And by default, with the Neo4j module, it does all the right thing. It waits for the write log to say that the Bolt server is started and we can connect to it. And then now it fails, but probably for another reason. But at least the container starts properly. So my bad, I forgot an annotation. Cannot retrieve a single record because its result is empty. OK, so at least we're getting further. So I have 2 minutes left to figure it out, and I probably won't figure it out in time, but let's see. So I'm telling my repository to save this Neo4j driver. Oh, and I think I know why. So let me check real quick. And that's one thing I feared, Let's see, I'm just gonna check again. That's a project I worked on before. Let's see. And if that's the case, the driver might not be the best thing to check stuff. Yeah, except I don't have a good example for that. So maybe let me try with Neo4j template, for instance. I'm gonna try real quick with 1 minute left. So template, find all, find one, find all, find all, find all. Yeah, find all looks fine for me. So at least I will get my entity. So it's completely independent of my repositories. So yeah, I'm just gonna try that real quick. Drivers dot as size 1 and contains exactly this. Well, this one. I'm just gonna be lazy just to see if I can solve it in time. because it might be, you know, transaction bits. I'm not sure about. I always get bit by this. I always forget. Something is red for some reason. Oh yeah, did I get rid of the driver? Oh yeah, still need the driver for. Yeah, just gonna keep the driver for the deletion stuff. And let's see if the test passes. If that's it, just, I mean, let's pray. Let's light a candle. Let's do something, and I hope that it works. If not, well, at least I will have a failing test to start with at the next session, which is always good. Always a good way to remind where to start from, to remind ourselves. Nope. Okay, well, sorry. Sorry. Oh yeah, and it looks for an empty constructor. So yeah, definitely something I need to double check. That will teach me to try new things I don't completely master. Yeah, so I will try to find a way to check that the data has been inserted. But at least it's trying to instantiate a driver, which is a good sign. It means it has found something. So that's good. That's encouraging, but we're not quite there yet. And I will try, maybe either I will start by fixing the test next week, or I will try to fix it in between and move on to some other parts of the user story. So thank you for joining today. I'm sorry it took me a few minutes to figure out the first problem, and I've not been able to solve the second one, but that's probably something trivial, and I will come back to you when I know more. And so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this first live stream. I will come back next week at the same hour, same day, and continue basically developing that small application to track, you know, the community landscape of drivers, library integrations, and libraries as well. So thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.